Hello, everyone, and welcome to the concluding event of this year's Hyper Week. As you know, the Hyper Week is a right management and people matters initiative to bring the community together to explore, discuss, and learn best practices about one of the biggest challenges that we're facing today in our organization, our high potentials. I'm a co-host, Esther Martinez, Editor-in-Chief People Matters. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, to each one of you, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all. This is the last radio show, as you know, for this year's edition of the Hyper Week. Before this, we had D. Shiv Kumar, President and CEO, PepsiCo India, and we had as well Sushil Mehta, Executive Vice President, India, Avantor Performance Materials, which both of them were great shows. I'm sure many of you followed that program, and for those who missed it, remember that they're available on our archives on People Matters website, the Hyper page. Today, again, we have a great program ahead. Very, very excited to introduce our co-host and our guest for today, with another successful CEO joining us to share his experience and views on high potentials. We're really grateful to have so many of you listening to our program right now live from around the country. Before we get started, let me introduce you to our co-host, Chaitali Mukherjee. She's the Country Manager, Right Management. Chaitali, welcome to the show. How are you feeling this morning?
Great, Esther. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here today. It's such a high to host a program like a radio program, and of course, as part of our Hyper Week. It's been terrifically successful in the past, so right now I'm extremely thrilled. A warm welcome to all our listeners from my side too, and I'm sure you'll be eagerly waiting to hear who's our guest today and what we hear from him.
That's right, Chaitali. Actually, it's already afternoon. Before I request you to introduce our guest for today, let me remind you that our show can also be followed on Twitter with the hashtag #HyperWeek. Please share your questions on Twitter so Chaitali and I can take them to the show. Remember, this is live. We are ready to go. You're listening to our radio show as part of the Hyper Week. Very, very excited. We are ready to go. Over to you, Chaitali.
Thank you, Esther. Welcome all to the grand finale of our Hyper Event Week, and I'm sure you all are as excited as I am for this last radio show of the season today, as we have with us the leader of an organization that has its core belief in nurturing talent to drive business success. The leader I'm talking about is an acknowledged name in the business and leads India South Asia for GE, the region that is one of the most important markets for GE. Previously, he has held senior leadership positions with Tata Power and Vatsala. We will speak to him about his personal story, his journey, his resolves, his sacrifices, but most importantly, the intrinsic qualities that have helped him shine in his professional journey. I'm talking about Banmali Agrawala, President and CEO, GE South Asia. Thank you very much, Banmali, for accepting our invite. It's a complete privilege to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Chaitali. It's indeed a pleasure for me as well to be on the call and share some of my experiences. I really look forward to this engagement.
Thank you.
Welcome, Banmali, to the show. We will start right away with the first question to you. Thank you, Chaitali, for a brief introduction, and I think all of us are really looking forward to this discussion. Remember to submit your questions on Twitter, Hyper Week, as we will continuously take them to the program. So, Banmali, the first question to you, if you go back in time and you remember when you were identified as a hypo, what was the biggest impact, both in your personal and professional life, after you were identified as a high potential?
So, just to first of all, if I kind of look back, I'm not sure if there was anyone, who came to me and who told me that, look here, you are a high potential employee or a candidate or a performer, etc. I don't think it was told to me in as many explicit terms, and this is, of course, I'm talking about ancient history here, but I started my career way back in '84. So at that point in time, the whole concept of maybe hypo, etc., it could be different terminology. But my point being that it wasn't so much someone saying pointedly that you are high potential, as opposed to signals being given in terms of more responsibility, faster than what they would be given to others, just recognition by leaders, in terms of being given the opportunity to speak up, given opportunities to represent the organization on different platforms, etc. So I think these were signs that one got to say that in a certain way I was being looked at more favorably as compared to the others that there were. So I think that those were the signs that came across to me. And I think naturally when you're kind of treated a little different or a little special, the first reaction, and especially when you're young, the first reaction is that of exhilaration. You feel special, you feel great. It borders on getting, I would say, arrogant, or a certain feel of superiority, which then I think has to be corrected very quickly. And that was done in my case, and I'll come to that in a while. So, I mean, those were, let's say, that was the first reaction, and those were the first few moments when, after I realized that, I was kind of being, as you said, picked out as being a hypo.
So what do you think was the biggest impact, if you look back in your personal life as well?
So I think the biggest impact, Esther, would be, as I said, I think it's that whole feeling of recognition. And I think recognition at a young age of what one is doing goes a long way in inspiring people and in getting people to do better. So I think that was clearly a feel that, okay, I'm being valued for what I'm doing, and that was truly exhilarating. And I think the other thing that it did was, okay, so now how can I use this, let's say, platform or opportunity to do something even bigger, to do something even faster, to contribute even more, because there is this, how should I say, a certain sense of expectation that has been placed on my shoulder. So I think I grew up and matured very quickly as a consequence of this confidence that was placed in me. And I think a further, let's say, related outcomes of this confidence was being promoted, getting senior positions, and so on. But what it also meant was that I think I was pretty young as compared to my peers because I was moving much faster. And I'm sure, as you would appreciate, especially in the Indian context and in many countries around Asia, in that context, age is a very important criteria or dimension in leadership. And if you are a leader or in a managerial position with a number of older people, either your peers or your subordinates, that's a very typical Indian or, as I said, Asian concept to deal with. And I think I learned to deal with that in the hard way, but pretty quickly. And I think I learned that, it would pay me a lot to be humble rather than wear my stripes on my shoulder. So I think those were some of the changes that came about, once I got the signal that, I'm on kind of a fast track.
Fantastic, Banmali, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about this very soon. Right now, for those of you who just joined in, we're in conversation with Banmali Agrawala, President and CEO GE South Asia, on his career and life. Tweet your questions on our Twitter handle using #HyperWeek.
Very exciting to hear what you just said, Banmali, about being one of the youngest, shortest tenure, etc., etc. A little on, the intrinsic qualities. What do you think has been the most important factor that has motivated you throughout your career and that kept you going?
So I'll just kind of pick out 3 or 4 things, if you'd allow me to. So first is, I think it clearly has to be attitude. More than anything else, more than qualification, more than training, more than skill, I think it's got to be attitude. And I think if the attitude is not right, to my mind, nothing works. And if the attitude is right, then I think a number of other things could be developed around that fundamental foundation. We could keep debating whether you can change attitude over time, whether you can build attitude over time. I think that's debatable, but I would clearly say that attitude is the single most, important criteria. And if you kind of go deeper when you talk about attitude, what does that mean? I think the first thing it would mean is humility. That one is humble enough to understand that there is a lot that you don't know, that there are others who are better than you, that you are indeed in a privileged position or fortunate to be in a certain place that you are. So I think being humble is a very critical piece of the whole attitude stuff. The second piece about attitude, I would say, is the willingness to learn. I think one has to be extremely hungry and curious all the time. The moment one kind of assumes that just because I'm in a certain position, I know it all, and I don't need to learn or listen to anyone, I think that is the beginning of the downfall. The second element of attitude, I would say, is the hunger to learn. The third, I'd say, is the willingness to take risks, and especially to take personal risks, especially in the earlier stages of one's career. I think if one wants to move fast, if one is identified as a hypo, then I think you've got to be willing to take risk. And this risk, I think, manifests itself in many ways. Risk of new jobs, and by new jobs I mean new assignments, risk of new cities, risk of relocation. All these are elements that I think one should be very willing to embrace. In my case, for example, I don't know how much I've moved around in my years with Varsila, but I think when the opportunity to move to Finland came down my way, I think I didn't hesitate at all to say yes to it. And that wasn't an easy choice, by the way. Finland's not the easiest of countries to live in, given the climate and what have you. But I think because of that decision, it kind of gave back to me in so many times over, because I think I was flexible enough in let's say in accepting that risk and accepting that challenge. And finally, I'd say, I don't know the age profile of the people that are on the call, but I think sooner or later, I'm sure everyone would have a partner in life. And I think the role of the partner in life gets to be extremely useful. And when I talk about attitude, just to acknowledge the fact that in your success, your partner is paying a price is something that needs to be very well understood and appreciated. In my case, when I was living in Finland and even otherwise, while I was busy at work, it was my wife who was, I had children. It was my wife who was kind of taking care of them, bearing the brunt of everything. And without her support, it would have been impossible for me to do whatever I was doing. And it's not as though she was not qualified or capable of doing something in terms of going out and working, etc. But the point I'm making is that the role of the partner becomes extremely important. And I'd just like to finish off this point by saying that if we were to correlate high potential with some kind of success, I think it's important to note that and put that in inverted commas, quote unquote, the price that one pays for that success, more often than not, is the family. And I think as long as one is sensitive towards that from an attitude perspective, I think one is well grounded. So sorry for a longish answer, but I hope it kind of addresses your question.
Outstanding, Banmali. Outstanding is the word. Very few people actually pick this up, but the reality is the success of any high potential cannot happen in isolation. A connected question, you spoke about high potential, you being a high pot and being younger in comparison to your peers, to your, subordinates. How did you tackle, if you can, even share one particular thing that you did differently? It would be a great value addition.
Sure. I mean, I think when I was in Varsila, and then subsequently in Tata Power as well, so I'll give you both those examples. While I was in Varsila, there was at least one member on my team who handled projects. He used to report to me, but I think his son was about the same age as I was. And so you can just about imagine the dynamics of such an equation where you have such a fairly wide gap in age. And I think the way I handled that was to be extremely respectful of this gentleman for his age, his experience, because it's not just age. I think along with his age came a ton of experience. I made it clear, not just to him, but to everyone around. It was very visible, and everyone knew that if this particular gentleman came in front of Banmali, he would be treated with immense amount of respect. People saw it, people knew it, and I made sure that I conveyed this message loud and clear, very visibly. In return, what I got was a kind of acceptance of this by this gentleman. He committed himself to delivering for me. He got that sense of, how should I say, respect, which I think was necessary. And it became a fantastic relationship between the two of us, and it worked beautifully. I had a similar instance in Tata Power when I was, I think, the youngest director on the board, and had another colleague on the board who was, again, who was much, much older than I was. And I think he kind of took it upon himself to be my coach and mentor. And in that particular case, I did not fight the position that he wanted to take vis-a-vis me. I accepted the fact that he wanted to be my coach and mentor. It didn't take away anything from what I was doing, but it kind of gave him that sense of seniority, or I wouldn't call it superiority, but seniority, and which I think worked well for me. So I think in the second case, I did not fight the let's say, the position that the elder member wanted to take. And again, I think I learned a lot in the bargain, and we are the best of friends and colleagues as we speak. So I think different approaches in both the scenarios, but I think they've worked reasonably well for me. But just switching tack and coming to GE, the first kind of shock that I had when I came to GE was that from being the youngest in both the earlier scenarios, in GE all of a sudden I was the oldest. And that too was, and oldest I'm saying relatively speaking, and that too is quite an eye-opener. And so handling the difference in age both ways is a challenge, and I think it has to be handled with a lot of care and sensitivity.
Sure, I think that's a great answer for all of us to take a leaf from. A little on overall your journey, among the various companies that you have worked with, Banmali, has a formal or an informal hypo identification notification process and development been a norm?
So let me take them one by one. First was Vatsala, where I worked. Vatsala did not have a formal process of identifying high potential candidates, but I think it was more that if some youngster showed flair, I think he or she was given opportunities. So it was more an informal way as opposed to a formal process of identifying things and so on. But I'd also say that I think you need to understand the culture, and this is another thing, that when we talk about high potential, when we talk about age, I think you also need to dig into the culture that surrounds the operation. So if you look at Scandinavian culture or Finnish culture, I think it's a very egalitarian society. Everyone is equal. There isn't a clamor amongst even youngsters to get promoted, to hold higher positions and what have you. I think the focus over there is a good quality of life. People would rather go back to their homes and tend to their gardens and look after their families. The differences in emoluments are very minimal. So the drivers for people in a different cultural context could be different, and I think one just needs to understand that. So in Vatsala, that was not the case. There wasn't a formal process. In the Tatas, as you know, they do have a system called the Tata Administrative Service, where they select people, and these are the people who kind of find their way into let's say, various managerial positions right across the Tata Group. In GE, of course, we have a very robust process of identifying, robust and formal process of identifying high potential candidates. We may or may not share that information with the candidate himself, but I think we certainly have a very robust and strong system that works beautifully. So amongst all the three, I would say that in GE, the machine that identifies talent and nurtures talent is perhaps the most phenomenal.
Sure, and of course, GE is one of the most, in fact, the most respected organization when it comes to developing high potentials. On that note, specific to GE India and South Asia, what have you seen to be the biggest benefits for the business from the high potential interventions that have been implemented?
Oh, I mean, clearly there are a number of benefits in the sense that you always have a constant pipeline of leadership. I mean, the one thing when you're an organization like GE is that you will have people who will move on from GE, who will leave GE, because they're such well-trained people that their market value, in a sense, is extremely high. And we always assume in GE that, we will have this kind of, we are the leadership fountain, in a manner of speaking, for global industry. it follows, therefore, that we've got to be prepared to handle this situation, and therefore we must have a pipeline of people at any given point in time constantly be available to fill in any openings that come up. So one of the outcomes of the high potentials, the entire exercise, is that we have a constant pipeline that runs extremely deep in the organization, so we are never ever short of leaders. The second is, I think if you, let's say, kind of give a younger lot of people more responsibility, even when they are, let's say, may not be 100% ready, my experience tells me that I think 9 times out of 10, or at least 8 times out of 10, they come out much better. So the reward is much more than the risk of trying out, someone who might not be 100% ready. And I think as a consequence, the confidence level that you see in such high potential people is amazing. As you know, in the GE context, I mean, if you need to be chairman of GE, I guess you'd need to be somewhere in your mid-40s to late 40s. That's how young we get people to be chairman of the company, and let alone running various businesses, which are, every business that we have within GE at a global level is, the smallest business that we have is about 8 billion. The biggest one we have is about 40 billion. If you see the people heading them, they are extremely young and of course bright. But again, they've come up through that process whereby they've been simply thrown at the deep end, given the opportunity, and they've come out winners at the other end. So I think the company has benefited a great deal.
That's quite an interesting perspective, very useful one to not just think about what you can do for your organization's business, but also for the corporations at large. Thanks for that, Banmali. Thank you, listeners, for tuning into #Hypo Week radio show, a right management and people matters initiative. I hope you all are enjoying the conversation as much as I'm doing, and we are listening to Banmali Agrawala, President and CEO, GE South Asia.
Thank you, Chitali. Banmali, it's an absolute pleasure to hear you share your experience. I'm sure the learning is resonating really with many of us today. Here are some questions I'm picking up from Twitter for you. I think I'll maybe have time for one or two. So you spoke about the programs that your previous organizations had, from a very non-formal process at Versailles to the TAS at Tata Power to the most mature process really at GE. And you also spoke about the impact of culture, both in terms of national and organizational culture. So there's one question related to that. What advice would you give to companies who want to start a hypo program? What are the top things that they should keep in mind if they don't have anything and they want to say, well, I want to get a hypo program started? What are the top things that you will advise them to keep in mind?
Well, there'll be a number of things, and I think it might be tough to just have a high potential program in the absence of a larger people management and people development program that runs alongside. So you can't just, to my mind, you can't just pluck out a high potential program and run it independently. The reason why it works well in GE is because if you look at the wider system by which GE manages people, it is a phenomenal and a robust system. And by that I mean, what's the system for evaluating performance? And even before performance, what's the system of setting down goals, of evaluating performance? How do you measure people? How do you reward them? So it's all a package, because it's in the context of that package that you then look at kind of high potentials. So the first thing I'd say is have a robust people management and people development program. That's a prerequisite. If you don't have it, I would say that, just take a step back before you get into the whole high potential thing. The second I would say is that I think that it's important to have depth before breadth. It's extremely crucial for the people who get into hypo, or even before that they need to be good at something before they begin to think wider in terms of managerial responsibility and so on and so forth. And the third I would say is that once having done that, the best way to encourage people to move ahead, and for people themselves who might be on the call, is I think to first look at doing well in your current assignment rather than trying to chart out the path of being the chairman or the MD of the company. I think many a times we kind of get lost in thinking about my next step, or after 2 or 3 steps, as opposed to how am I doing in my current assignment and current job. So I kind of drill it down and bring it down to those elements. From a management or a company perspective, I think it's important that the company is continuously growing, because if you do not grow, it's tough to give people opportunities and leadership positions and what have you. So I think, the company has to be in a growth mode in some form or fashion. And of course, at GE, we have this huge advantage because we are such a diverse company. It gives tremendous opportunity for people to move from one business across to another and so on. And therefore, I think it gets to be attractive. But I think those are some of the elements.
Fantastic, Banmali. Growth is clearly a prerequisite, and I think the clear message that talent management programs can't be done in isolation. It's all a package. I think that's a very powerful statement. You're listening to Banmali Agrawala, President and CEO, GE South Asia, live on air. We are at the Hyper Radio Show. We are coming almost to the end of the show. It's been really, really exciting, and it's fantastic for all of us to listen to your learnings. And I see so many of you who have joined from the beginning and have been actively listening to our guest today, and so active on Twitter as well. Before we close the program, Banmali, we have a question that we've actually asked all the leaders who have joined the Hyper Week this year. And we want to ask this question as well to you. And I'm going to change it a little bit contextually, because I think to some extent you've given us some hint in the last half an hour or so. Many of our listeners are hypos themselves. And I wanted you to give them a message that you personally want to give to them. And maybe in the context of what you meant in the beginning of the show when you started saying that there's a correlation between success and the price the one pays for success, which in your case, in your own words, was family. Can you give us an advice on, how to manage work and life, and how can we have it all in our journey of hypos?
Well, I think to answer a question on work-life balance, etc., I mean, that's one of the most difficult, as you know. And I wish I had the answer. I sincerely wish I had the answer. And my only take on that would be, I think each one of us have to find our own balance, make our own peace with ourselves. But I think as long as we don't take our partners for granted, I think, we'll find that answer. The mistake that we normally make is just to take it for granted that, the partner, the family, and everybody else around us will simply just play along. Whatever we choose to do, especially if you are, on any journey of leadership or excellence. So I'm sorry, I don't have a formula to your answer. I think this is something that everyone will have to answer for themselves.
Fantastic, Banmali, fantastic. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we hear many leaders, and I think you have answered it beautifully by saying that, gratitude to your partner might be the answer. Each one of us have to find that. So with this, we come to really the end of this exciting radio show of the Hyper Week. We want to thank Banmali Agrawala, President and CEO, GE South Asia, for being such a fantastic guest. A big thank you, Banmali, for sharing your insights and experience.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope some of whatever I said was useful to you. I wish you all the very best in all that you're planning to do. And it's a beautiful world out there with tremendous opportunities. So just go grab it all.
Thank you. Before we close the program, just want to remind you that the recording of the show will also be available for you to listen again and to share with your peers as part of the Hyper Week page on People Matters website. Of course, a big thank you to you, Chatali, for being such a great co-host, and to your complete team at Right Management for being such a great support.
Thank you, Esther. It's been a great experience. It's been outstanding to listen to what Banmali has said, and we all have enjoyed the conversation. Thanks a lot to all the participants for cluing in, and most importantly, Banmali, thanks a ton for your valuable thoughts, and most importantly for your time, which is of real essence for everyone, for high potentials, and most importantly the leaders. Thank you so much.
This has been yet another great show. Thank you all for listening and participating on Twitter as well. As we close the radio show, we wish you a great and inspiring day ahead.